The dust kicked up around Penelope Carter's boots as she stood frozen on the platform, watching the westbound train disappear into the horizon like her last thread of hope, vanishing into the scorching Nebraska afternoon. Her throat tightened as reality crashed down upon her shoulders with the weight of an anvil. She had missed it. The train to Cheyenne, where her younger sister Margaret lay ill with fever, waiting for the medicine that Penelope carried in her worn carpetbag. The next train would not depart until 3 days from now, and she had spent every last cent on the ticket clutched uselessly in her trembling hand. Red Cloud, Nebraska was not much of a town in the summer of 1882, just a collection of weathered buildings and sun-bleached storefronts that seemed to sag under the oppressive heat. Penelope pressed her palm against her forehead, feeling sweat gathering at her temples as panic threatened to overwhelm her completely. She had no money for lodging, no money for food, and certainly no money for another ticket. The station master had made it painfully clear that her ticket was non-transferable and non-refundable when she had pleaded with him moments ago. She sank onto the wooden bench outside the depot, her green traveling dress already coated with a fine layer of prairie dust. At 22 years old, Penelope had always prided herself on her practicality and level-headedness, but nothing had prepared her for this particular disaster. She thought of Margaret, barely 17, lying in that boarding house bed in Wyoming Territory, depending on her eldest sister to bring the laudanum and fever medicine that the doctor in Omaha had prescribed. Their aunt had sent a telegram 5 days ago, and Penelope had moved heaven and earth to scrape together the funds for this journey. "Miss, you all right there?" The voice was deep and gentle, with a hint of concern that made Penelope look up sharply. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He wore dusty denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a battered hat that had seen better days. A bandana hung loosely around his neck, and his boots were scuffed from hard work. He could not have been much older than her, perhaps 25 at most, with an honest face that bore the marks of countless hours in the unforgiving sun. "I am fine, thank you," Penelope managed, though her voice cracked with the lie. The cowboy shifted his weight, clearly unconvinced. "Pardon me for saying so, miss, but you do not look fine. You have been sitting here for near about 20 minutes, and I watched you chase after that train like the devil himself was on your heels." Penelope felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I missed my connection." "It is nothing that concerns you, sir." "Name's Jackson Pierce," he said, removing his hat and holding it respectfully against his chest. "And you are right, it is not my business. But my mama raised me to help folks in trouble when I can, and you got that look about you like trouble found you today." Something about his earnest expression crumbled the last of Penelope's composure. To her absolute mortification, tears began streaming down her face. "My sister is ill in Cheyenne. I have medicine for her, but I missed my train and I have no money for another ticket. I spent everything I had getting here, and now she will be waiting for me and I cannot get to her." Jackson Pierce's expression shifted immediately from polite concern to determination. He sat down beside her on the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. "When is the next train?" 3 days, Penelope whispered, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I do not even have money for a room at the boarding house." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his hat turning slowly in his hands as he appeared to be thinking hard. Finally, he looked at her directly. "How far is Cheyenne from here?" "I do not know exactly, perhaps 200 miles. And your sister, how bad off is she? The fever has lasted a week. She needs this medicine." Penelope clutched her carpetbag tighter. "Every day matters." Jackson nodded slowly, then stood up with purpose. "I've got a proposition for you, Miss Carter. Penelope Carter. Miss Carter. I have got 2 horses and I know the trail to Cheyenne well enough. I can get you there in 4, maybe 5 days if we ride hard. It will be rough going, but it will be faster than waiting for that train." Penelope stared at him, uncertain whether she had heard correctly. "You would take me, but you do not even know me. I have no way to pay you." "I am not asking for payment," Jackson said firmly. "I am asking if you trust me enough to help you get where you need to go. Your sister needs you, and waiting around here for 3 days does not sit right with me when I have the means to help." Every proper instinct told Penelope she should refuse, should not ride off into the wilderness with a stranger, but desperation made its own logic. She searched Jackson's face for any sign of deception or ill intent and found only honest concern. Something in her gut told her he was trustworthy. "Why would you do this?" she asked quietly. Jackson's expression grew distant for a moment. "I had a younger brother. Died of pneumonia when he was 15 because we could not get him to a doctor in time. We lived too far out, and by the time we made it to town, it was too late. I cannot stand by and let someone else go through that if I can prevent it." The rawness in his voice convinced her more than any eloquent speech could have. Penelope stood up, squaring her shoulders. "Then I accept your help, Mr. Pierce. Thank you." "Just Jackson is fine," he said, and the hint of a smile touched his weathered face. "Come on, let us get you provisioned. I have got some money saved up, and we will need supplies for the journey." Within 2 hours, they were riding out of Red Cloud as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Jackson had purchased dried beef, hardtack, coffee, and other necessities, refusing to let Penelope feel guilty about the expense. His horses were sturdy ranch animals, not elegant but reliable. Penelope rode a sorrel mare named Daisy who had a gentle disposition, while Jackson rode a larger bay gelding he called Buck. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of golden grass rippling in the hot wind. Penelope had never been much of a rider, having spent most of her life in Omaha working as a seamstress, but she gritted her teeth and adjusted to the mare's gait as best she could. Jackson rode beside her, occasionally offering quiet tips about her posture or how to move with the horse rather than against it. "You are doing well," he said as they crested a low hill. "Most folks who are not used to riding would be complaining by now." "I am too worried to complain," Penelope admitted. "All I can think about is Margaret." "Tell me about her," Jackson suggested. "It will help pass the time." So Penelope did. She talked about how their parents had died of cholera 4 years ago, leaving her to care for Margaret. She spoke of how bright her sister was, how she loved to read and had dreams of becoming a teacher. She explained how Margaret had traveled to Cheyenne to work for their aunt, who ran a small restaurant there, and how the fever had struck suddenly. Jackson listened attentively, asking questions that showed he genuinely cared about her answers. In turn, Penelope learned that Jackson worked as a ranch hand on a cattle operation south of Red Cloud, that he had grown up in Missouri and come west after the war between the states, though he was too young to have fought. His parents had died in a fire, and he had been on his own since he was 16. "That must have been terribly hard," Penelope said softly. "It taught me to rely on myself," Jackson replied, "and to appreciate good people when I meet them." As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Jackson found them a suitable spot to make camp near a small creek. He helped Penelope down from her horse with a steadying hand on her elbow, and she realized how sore she already was from the hours in the saddle. "It gets easier," he assured her, as if reading her thoughts. "By tomorrow evening, your body will start adjusting." While Jackson tended to the horses and built a fire, Penelope found herself watching him work. There was an efficiency to his movements, a competence that came from years of outdoor living. He was patient and methodical, taking care of every detail without complaint. When he caught her looking, she quickly busied herself with unpacking the food supplies. They ate a simple meal of hardtack and dried beef as the stars emerged overhead, countless and brilliant in the vast prairie sky. The fire crackled between them, and Penelope wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders as the temperature dropped. "Tomorrow we will make good time," Jackson said, pouring coffee from the pot he had heated over the flames. "The trail gets a bit rougher once we cross into Wyoming territory, but nothing we cannot handle." "I still cannot quite believe you are doing this," Penelope said, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. "Most people would have walked right past me at that station." Jackson shrugged. "Most people are not most people, if that makes sense. Everyone is just trying to get by in their own way. I figure if I can help someone without it costing me too much, then that is what I ought to do." "It is costing you work time, though, is it not? Will your employer not be angry?" "I have got some time coming to me," Jackson said. "Boss knows I am reliable. He will understand." They fell into a comfortable silence, sipping coffee and listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Crickets sang in the grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. Penelope felt exhaustion pulling at her, but also a strange sense of safety she had not expected. This man, this stranger who had become her unlikely savior, had already shown her more kindness than she had encountered in months. "You should get some sleep," Jackson said eventually. "I will keep watch for a while." "Keep watch for what?" Penelope asked, suddenly nervous. "Nothing specific," he assured her. "Just habit. Out here it is better to be cautious. You take my bedroll and I will make do with my saddle blanket." Penelope wanted to protest, but her body was already aching with tiredness. She settled into the bedroll Jackson had laid out for her, using her carpet bag as a pillow. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Jackson sitting by the fire, silhouetted against the flames, keeping his silent vigil over the night. She woke once in the deepest part of darkness to find him still there, though he had moved to lean against his saddle. The fire had burned down to embers, and she could hear his steady breathing. The sight of him, this guardian she barely knew, made her heart do something strange in her chest before she drifted back to sleep. Morning came with the sun blazing red on the eastern horizon. Penelope woke to find Jackson already up, the fire rekindled and coffee brewing. Her entire body protested as she sat up, muscles she did not know she had announcing their displeasure. "Good morning," Jackson said cheerfully. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was trampled by a herd of cattle," Penelope admitted, then immediately regretted complaining. But Jackson just laughed, a warm sound that seemed to fit the morning perfectly. "That is about right for your second day of hard riding. Here, coffee will help." They ate a quick breakfast and were back on the trail as the sun climbed higher. True to Jackson's word, the landscape began to change as they traveled northwest. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, and in the distance, Penelope could see the hazy outline of mountains. "That is the territory line up ahead," Jackson pointed. "We will cross it around midday." As they rode, they talked more. Jackson asked about her work as a seamstress, and Penelope found herself describing the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from fabric and thread. He told her stories about ranch life, about branding cattle and breaking horses, about sleeping under the stars and facing down storms on the open range. His stories were vivid and engaging, and Penelope realized he had a gift for description that brought his experiences to life. "You should write these down," she said impulsively. "Your stories, I mean. People would enjoy reading them." Jackson looked surprised. I am not much for writing, never had much schooling. You can read, though, enough to get by. My mama taught me the basics before she passed. Reading and writing are not so different, Penelope said. If you can think it and say it, you can write it. Maybe, Jackson said, but he looked pleased by the suggestion. By midday, they had crossed into Wyoming territory, and the terrain grew more challenging. The horses picked their way through rocky areas and across shallow streams. Jackson remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape. Once, he held up his hand to stop her, and they waited in silence while a small group of pronghorn antelope passed in the distance. They are beautiful, Penelope whispered. That they are, Jackson agreed. This land has its own kind of beauty, harsh sometimes, but beautiful. They made camp that night near a stand of cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade and shelter. Penelope's body was adjusting to the riding as Jackson had promised, though she was still grateful to dismount. She helped him care for the horses this time, learning how to brush them down and check their hooves for stones. You are a quick learner, Jackson observed as she worked on Daisy. I have always believed in being useful, Penelope replied. You are doing so much for me. The least I can do is help with the work. As they sat by the fire that evening, eating beans Jackson had heated in a small pot, Penelope found herself studying him again. In the firelight, his features were softened, and she noticed things she had missed before. The laugh lines around his eyes, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it touched his collar. The careful way he moved, as if always conscious of the space he occupied and the people around him. What are you thinking about? Jackson asked suddenly, catching her staring. Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. I was thinking about how grateful I am. And how strange it is that I feel safer with you, a man I met only yesterday, than I have felt in a long time. Jackson's expression grew serious. I am glad you feel safe. That matters to me. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why does it matter so much to you helping me? He was quiet for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. I suppose because I spent a lot of years feeling helpless. When my brother died, when my parents died, I could not do anything to change it. But this, helping you get to your sister, this is something I can do, something that matters. It matters more than you know, Penelope said softly. You may very well be saving Margaret's life. Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them that made Penelope's breath catch. It was not just gratitude she felt, she realized with a start. It was something deeper, something that had been growing since that first moment on the station platform. She barely knew this man, yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. Jackson cleared his throat and looked away first. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. The third day of their journey brought clouds rolling in from the west, dark and heavy with rain. Jackson eyed them warily as they broke camp. Storm is coming, he said. We need to make good time and find shelter before it hits. They rode harder than they had the previous days, and Penelope focused on keeping pace with Jackson as the wind picked up and the sky grew darker. The first drops of rain began to fall around mid-afternoon, fat and cold against her skin. Within minutes, it became a downpour. There. Jackson shouted over the sound of the rain, pointing toward a rocky outcropping ahead. We can wait it out there. They urged the horses forward, and soon found themselves under the shelter of an overhang that provided blessed relief from the deluge. Jackson helped Penelope down, and they stood together catching their breath while the horses shifted nervously behind them. Are you all right? Jackson asked, water streaming from his hat brim. Penelope nodded, though she was soaked through. I am fine, just wet. Jackson pulled their supplies under the shelter and retrieved a blanket, which he draped around her shoulders. You need to stay warm. Last thing we need is you catching a chill." As the storm raged outside their shelter, they huddled together for warmth. Jackson built a small fire using dried wood from his saddlebags and some kindling he had kept wrapped in oilcloth. The flames sputtered at first but eventually caught, providing warmth and light in the gray gloom. "How much further to Cheyenne?" Penelope asked, watching the rain. "If the weather clears, we might make it by tomorrow evening, but this storm could slow us down." Penelope felt anxiety twist in her stomach. 4 days already. She prayed Margaret was holding on, that the fever had not worsened. As if sensing her worry, Jackson moved closer. "She will be all right," he said firmly. "You are doing everything you can. I keep thinking I should have left sooner, should have found a way to get more money for a faster route." "You cannot think like that," Jackson said. "You are here now doing your best. That is all anyone can do." The warmth of his body next to hers was comforting, and Penelope found herself leaning slightly into him. He did not pull away. Instead, he adjusted the blanket to cover them both better. "Jackson," she said quietly, "when this is over, when Margaret is well, I want to repay you somehow. I told you I do not want payment. I know, but surely there is something, some way I can thank you properly." He turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the fire, his eyes were intense. "Just promise me you will write and let me know she is all right. That is all the thanks I need." "I promise," Penelope whispered, and she realized how close their faces had become. She could see the droplets of rain still clinging to his eyelashes, could feel the warmth of his breath. Her heart was pounding, and not from the exertion of riding. Jackson seemed to realize their proximity at the same moment. He started to pull back, but Penelope reached out and touched his arm. "Wait, Miss Carter, He began, but she shook her head. "Penelope. Please call me Penelope." "Penelope," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like something precious. "I do not want you to think I am taking advantage. You are in a difficult situation and I am just trying to help." "I know," she said. "But what I am feeling right now has nothing to do with the situation and everything to do with you, with the kind of man you are." "We barely know each other," Jackson said, but his voice was rough with emotion. "I know enough," Penelope replied. "I know you are brave and kind and selfless. I know you make me feel safe and cared for. I know that when I look at you, something in my heart recognizes something in yours." Jackson's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a raindrop that had tracked down her face. "You are remarkable, do you know that? Strong and determined and beautiful." "Kiss me," Penelope breathed, no longer caring about propriety or caution. He did. His lips met hers gently at first, questioning, then with more passion as she responded. It was everything a first kiss should be, tender and fierce at once, full of promise and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I did not expect this," Jackson admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "When I saw you on that platform, I never imagined." "Neither did I," Penelope said, "but I am not sorry it is happening." They held each other as the storm continued outside, and Penelope felt something shift fundamentally in her world. 4 days ago, her life had been about work and worry and taking care of Margaret. Now, in the arms of a cowboy who had shown her unexpected kindness, she was discovering what it meant to be cared for in return. The storm passed eventually, and they rode on through the muddy afternoon. But something had changed between them. Their conversations were more intimate, their glances more meaningful. Jackson reached over once to squeeze her hand as they rode side by side, and the simple gesture made Penelope's heart soar. They camped that night under stars that emerged brilliant after the rain, and when Jackson laid out the bedrolls, he placed them close together. They sat talking long into the night, sharing stories from their childhoods, their dreams and fears. Penelope learned that Jackson hoped to own his own ranch someday, a small operation where he could raise horses. Jackson learned that Penelope had always wanted to open a dress shop where she could create beautiful things for women who needed them. "You would be wonderful at that," Jackson said. "You have got that eye for beauty and detail." "Maybe someday," Penelope said wistfully. "For now, I need to focus on taking care of Margaret." "What if you did not have to choose?" Jackson asked carefully. "What if there was a way to do both?" "What do you mean?" He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I know it is fast, probably too fast, but Penelope, I feel something with you I have never felt before. Like I have been waiting my whole life and did not know what for until I saw you on that platform." Penelope's breath caught. "I feel it too. When we get to Cheyenne, when your sister is better, I want to court you properly. I want to see if this thing between us is as real as it feels." "It is real," Penelope said with certainty. "I do not need time to tell me what my heart already knows." Jackson kissed her again under the vast starry sky, and Penelope felt the pieces of her life rearranging themselves into a new pattern, one that included this remarkable man. The fourth day dawned clear and bright, and they set out with renewed energy. Jackson estimated they would reach Cheyenne by evening if they maintained a good pace. Penelope's anticipation grew with every mile, eager to see Margaret, but also aware that reaching their destination would mark the end of this journey with Jackson. As if reading her mind, Jackson said, "This does not end in Cheyenne. You know that, right?" "I hope not," Penelope replied. "But I do not know what happens next. Margaret will need care, and I do not have money or work in Cheyenne." "Then we will figure it out together," Jackson said firmly. "I am not letting you go now that I have found you." They stopped around midday to rest the horses and eat. As they sat together, sharing dried fruit Jackson had purchased back in Red Cloud, Penelope noticed how comfortable she had become with him. The awkwardness of those first hours had given way to an easy intimacy that felt natural and right. "Tell me about your aunt," Jackson asked. "The one Margaret is staying with." "Aunt Ruth is my father's sister. She is practical and somewhat stern, but she has a good heart. She took Margaret in when I could not afford to keep both of us in Omaha. I send money when I can, and Margaret helps with the restaurant work." "Do you think she will approve of me?" Jackson asked with a slight grin. "Are you worried about meeting my family?" Penelope teased. "Maybe a little," he admitted. "I am just a cowhand after all, not much to offer in terms of prospects." Penelope took his face in her hands. "You are offering me your heart, your protection, your kindness. Those are not small things, Jackson Pierce. Those are everything." His smile was radiant. "When you put it that way." They rode through the afternoon, and as the sun began its descent, the town of Cheyenne appeared on the horizon. It was larger than Red Cloud, with more buildings and visible activity even from a distance. Penelope's anxiety returned full force as they drew closer. "What if we are too late?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "Then we will deal with it together," Jackson said. "But I have got a feeling your sister is tougher than you think. She has got your blood after all." They rode directly to the address Penelope had been given, a modest building that housed both the restaurant on the ground floor and living quarters above. Penelope dismounted before Jackson could help her, her legs unsteady from days of riding and the surge of nervous energy. A woman emerged from the restaurant entrance, her face lined with worry and fatigue. "Penelope, is that you?" "Aunt Ruth." Penelope rushed forward. "How is Margaret?" "Still fevered but holding on. She has been asking for you constantly. Did you bring the medicine?" "Yes, right here." Penelope clutched her carpetbag. "Take me to her." Ruth's eyes moved to Jackson, who had remained by the horses. "And who is this?" "This is Jackson Pierce," Penelope said quickly. "He helped me get here when I missed my train. I will explain everything, but please, I need to see Margaret first." Ruth nodded and led Penelope inside and up a narrow staircase. Jackson waited below, tending to the horses and trying not to let his worry show. He had grown invested in this outcome, not just because of Penelope, but because the idea of that young girl suffering felt personal after his own brother's death. Nearly an hour passed before Penelope reappeared. Her face was pale but relieved. "She is awake and lucid. The fever has not broken yet, but the doctor came earlier and said if we can get the medicine into her, she should improve. Ruth is with her now, giving her the laudanum." Jackson felt tension he had not realized he was carrying release from his shoulders. Thank God. Penelope walked directly to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his chest. He held her tightly, feeling her shake with relief and exhaustion. "You did it," he murmured into her hair. "You got here in time." "We did it," she corrected, looking up at him with eyes bright with tears. "I could not have done this without you, Jackson. You saved her life." "You saved her life," he countered. "I just got you here." Ruth appeared in the doorway, watching them with curiosity. "Penelope, you should come back up. Margaret wants to see you again." Penelope nodded but seemed reluctant to leave Jackson. "Will you wait?" "I am not going anywhere," he promised. Over the next 2 days, Jackson found lodging at a nearby boarding house while Penelope remained with her sister. He visited daily, bringing food and sitting with Ruth in the restaurant while Penelope tended to Margaret upstairs. The medicine worked as the doctor had hoped, and Margaret's fever began to break on the 2nd day. Ruth, initially suspicious of Jackson, gradually warmed to him as she observed his behavior. "You really rode all that way with her, asking nothing in return?" she asked him over coffee one afternoon. "Yes, madam," Jackson replied. "It was the right thing to do." "Most men would have wanted something," Ruth said pointedly. "I am not most men," Jackson said simply, "and Penelope is not just anyone." Ruth studied him carefully. "My niece is a good woman. She has had a hard life since her parents passed. If you are going to pursue her affections, I need to know your intentions are honorable." "They are," Jackson said firmly. "I want to build a life with her if she will have me. I know I do not have much right now, but I am a hard worker and I am reliable. I will provide for her and Margaret. You have my word. What about your work back in Red Cloud? I will need to return briefly to settle things with my employer and collect my belongings. But I intend to find work here in Cheyenne, or wherever Penelope wants to be." Ruth nodded slowly. "You are either a very good man or a very skilled liar. For her sake, I hope it is the former." "I understand your concern, madam. If I were in your position, I would feel the same way." On the 3rd day after their arrival, Margaret was well enough to sit up in bed and talk. Penelope brought Jackson upstairs to meet her sister properly. Margaret was thin and pale, but her eyes were bright with intelligence and curiosity. She looked between Penelope and Jackson with obvious interest. "So you are the cowboy who brought my sister across half of Wyoming territory?" "I am," Jackson said, hat in hand. "It is good to see you looking better, Miss Margaret." "Penelope has told me everything," Margaret said. "About missing the train, about your journey. That was incredibly kind of you." "Your sister is easy to be kind to," Jackson replied, and the look he gave Penelope made Margaret smile knowingly. "I think there is more to this story than just kindness," Margaret observed. "The way you two look at each other tells me plenty." Penelope blushed. "Margaret." "I am sick, not blind," Margaret said with a laugh that turned into a cough. When she recovered, she looked at Jackson seriously. "Are you in love with my sister, Margaret? You cannot just ask him that," Penelope protested, mortified. But Jackson was not flustered. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." The room fell silent. Penelope stared at him, her heart pounding. They had spoken of courtship and of feelings, but neither had used that word yet. "And you, Penelope?" Margaret pressed. "Are you in love with him?" Penelope met Jackson's eyes and saw everything she needed to see there. "Yes," she whispered. "I am." Jackson crossed the small room in 2 strides and took her hand. "Then let us not waste any more time dancing around it. Penelope Carter, I know we have only known each other a handful of days, but I also know my own heart. I love you. I want to marry you, build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to help you care for your sister and eventually open that dress shop you dream about. I want everything with you." Tears streamed down Penelope's face. "I want that too, all of it." "Is that a yes?" Jackson asked, smiling. "Yes," Penelope said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, right there in front of Margaret and Ruth, who had appeared in the doorway. When they broke apart, both women were dabbing at their eyes. "Well," Ruth said with gruff affection, "I suppose we will be planning a wedding then." "Nothing fancy," Penelope said quickly. "We do not have money for fancy." "Love does not need fancy," Jackson said. "It just needs to be real." The wedding took place 2 weeks later, after Margaret was fully recovered and on her feet again. It was a simple ceremony at the local church, with Ruth and Margaret as witnesses, and a few of Ruth's friends in attendance. Penelope wore a dress she had sewn herself in the days leading up to the wedding, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar that Margaret had helped her choose. Jackson wore his best shirt and a new vest he had purchased for the occasion. When Penelope walked down the short aisle toward him, his face lit up with such joy that several people in attendance remarked on it later. They spoke their vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed Penelope with such tenderness that she felt her knees go weak. Ruth hosted a small reception at the restaurant, and neighbors brought food and well wishes. Margaret gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying, talking about her sister's strength and Jackson's unexpected heroism. "He proved that chivalry is not dead in the West," Margaret said, "and that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments." As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Jackson and Penelope walked back to the room they had rented above the general store. It was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street of Cheyenne. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Pierce?" Jackson asked, pulling her close. "Perfect," Penelope said. "Absolutely perfect." That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion, discovering each other in the intimate darkness. Afterward, lying in Jackson's arms, Penelope felt a completeness she had never known before. "I keep thinking about that day on the platform," she murmured. "If I had not missed that train, we never would have met." "I do not believe that," Jackson said, stroking her hair. "I think we were meant to find each other one way or another. The train was just how it happened to work out." Jackson returned briefly to Red Cloud to collect his things and explain the situation to his employer, who was understanding and even gave him a small bonus for his years of faithful service. He returned to Cheyenne with his few belongings and a determination to build a new life. He found work at a ranch outside of town, breaking horses and helping with cattle operations. The pay was decent, and the owner appreciated his skills and work ethic. Penelope, meanwhile, began taking in sewing and alterations, working from their small room. Word spread quickly about her talent, and soon she had more work than she could handle alone. Margaret, fully recovered, continued helping Ruth with the restaurant, but also assisted Penelope with simpler sewing tasks. The 3 women, along with Jackson, formed a tight family unit that supported each other through the daily challenges of frontier life. As months passed, Penelope and Jackson fell deeper in love. They learned each other's quirks and habits, their dreams and fears. Jackson loved how Penelope hummed while she sewed, how she always saved him the best portions of dinner, how she looked at him like he was the most important person in her world. Penelope loved how Jackson always kissed her forehead before leaving for work, how he listened when she talked about her day, how he made her feel cherished and valued. A year after their wedding, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. Jackson's reaction was pure joy, lifting her and spinning her around their now slightly larger apartment. They had saved enough money to move into a better space, with 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. "We are going to be parents," he said, wonder in his voice. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Penelope assured him. Their son was born in the spring of 1884, a healthy boy with his father's brown eyes and his mother's determined chin. They named him Thomas, after Jackson's late brother, and James after Penelope's father. Jackson proved to be a devoted father, often walking the floor with the baby at night so Penelope could rest. He sang old cowboy songs in his rough voice, and little Thomas seemed to love them. Margaret doted on her nephew, and even Ruth softened considerably around the baby. When Thomas was 6 months old, an opportunity arose that would change their lives. The owner of the ranch where Jackson worked decided to sell a portion of his land and offered Jackson first option to purchase. The price was fair, and Jackson had been saving every extra penny since marrying Penelope. "It is not much," he told her, spreading out the survey map on their kitchen table. 50 acres with a small stream running through, but it is enough to start our own operation. I could raise horses like I have always wanted, and there is space enough for you to have a proper shop building if you wanted." Penelope looked at the map, then at her husband's hopeful face. "Can we afford it?" "Just barely," Jackson admitted. "It will take everything we have saved, and we will have to work hard to make it succeed, but I believe we can do it, together." "Then let us do it," Penelope said decisively. "Let us build something that is truly ours." They purchased the land in the fall of 1884, and Jackson immediately began working on building a small house and barn. Friends from the ranch helped with the construction, and by winter, they had a modest but sturdy home to move into. Penelope set up her sewing room in the best-lit corner of the house, and Jackson began acquiring horses to train and sell. Margaret eventually married a young teacher who came to Cheyenne in 1885, and they built their own home not far from Jackson and Penelope's property. The sisters remained close, visiting frequently and supporting each other through the challenges of frontier life. Penelope's dress business grew steadily, and she hired 2 young women to help her keep up with demand. Jackson's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and he began receiving commissions from ranchers throughout the region. Money was never abundant, but it was steady, and they were building something lasting. 3 years after Thomas's birth, Penelope gave birth to twin girls, whom they named Rose and Lily. Jackson was overwhelmed with joy at having daughters, and proved to be gentle and patient with them as they grew. Thomas, now a rambunctious 3-year-old, was initially skeptical of his sisters but eventually became protective of them. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Penelope by taking her back to Red Cloud, Nebraska, to the very train platform where they had met. They stood there together, watching a train pull in and passengers disembark. "You ever wonder what would have happened if someone else had helped you that day?" Jackson asked. "No," Penelope said firmly, "because I truly believe it could only have been you. We were meant to be, Jackson." From that very first moment, "I love you," he said, pulling her close. "More now than I did then, and I will love you even more tomorrow than I do today." "That is the best promise you have ever made me," Penelope said, kissing him softly. They returned to their ranch, to their children and their life together. Over the years that followed, they continued to build their small empire. The ranch expanded, and Penelope eventually opened her dress shop in Cheyenne, traveling into town 3 days a week to work there while her employees managed things in her absence. Thomas grew into a fine young man who shared his father's love of horses. The twins were as different as night and day, with Rose being quiet and bookish like her Aunt Margaret, while Lily was adventurous and bold. 2 more children followed over the years, another boy and another girl, rounding out their family at 6 children total. Through good years and hard ones, through droughts and harsh winters, through sickness and health, Jackson and Penelope remained devoted to each other. They had built a life neither could have imagined in those desperate moments on that red cloud platform, but which both cherished with their whole hearts. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, friends and neighbors, they renewed their vows in the same church where they had married. Penelope wore a dress she had sewn herself, more elaborate than her original wedding dress, but made with the same care. Jackson wore a fine suit that marked him as the successful rancher he had become, but his eyes held the same honest kindness they had possessed when he was a simple cowhand helping a stranded woman. "You know what I realized today?" Jackson said to her as they danced at the celebration afterward. "What is that?" Penelope asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "That I would live that whole journey again, every hard mile of it, just to end up right here with you." "We already are right here," Penelope pointed out with a smile. "Then I would live it again, just for the joy of falling in love with you all over again," Jackson said. Penelope looked up at him, this man who had changed her entire life with one simple act of kindness, who had loved her faithfully through every challenge, who had built a beautiful life with her from nothing but determination and love. "I love you, Jackson Pierce," she said. "Today, tomorrow, and always." "And I love you, Penelope Pierce," he replied. "Forever." As they danced under the stars, surrounded by the evidence of their love in the faces of their children and grandchildren, both reflected on how one missed train had led to the greatest journey of their lives. Not the physical journey across Nebraska and Wyoming, though that had been important, but the journey of 2 hearts finding each other and building something lasting. Years later, when they were old and gray, they would sit on the porch of their ranch house and watch the sunset together, holding hands just as they had during those first days on the trail. They never tired of telling their grandchildren the story of how they met, how a cowboy had helped a desperate woman reach her sister, and how that kindness had blossomed into the deepest love either had ever known. The ranch would eventually pass to Thomas, who would run it with the same integrity his father had shown. The dress shop would be taken over by Rose, who would expand it into a thriving business. Each of their children would carry forward the lessons they had learned from parents who had loved deeply and built wisely. And every year on the anniversary of that fateful day at the Red Cloud Station, the Pierce family would gather together to celebrate, not just a wedding anniversary, but the moment when everything had changed. When a missed train had become the greatest blessing imaginable, proving that sometimes what feels like disaster is actually destiny arranging itself. Jackson Pierce kept his promise to love Penelope more with each passing day until his final breath, and Penelope never stopped being grateful for the cowboy who had seen a woman in trouble and decided to help, asking nothing in return but giving everything. Their love story became legend in their community, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the beautiful truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments we least expect. The ranch they built together stood for generations as a monument to what two people could create when they combined love with hard work and faith. And somewhere in the vast Wyoming sky, the stars that had watched over their first journey together continued to shine, eternal witnesses to a love that had begun with a missed train and a cowboy's compassion, and had grown into something that would outlast them both, living on in the hearts and lives of everyone they touched.